The city of Boston was hungover. It was the early morning hours of March 18th, 1990. The St. Patrick's Day revelry had finally died down. The parades were over, the green beer was gone, and the streets of the Fenway district were quiet. A thick fog was rolling in off the Atlantic, blanketing the fens. It was the kind of silence that usually suggests safety, or at least sleep. But at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, something was about to happen that would shatter that silence and leave a scar on the art world that has never healed.
That's right. At 1:24 a.m., a vehicle pulled up near the museum's side entrance on Palace Road. Inside were two men. They weren't art critics, they weren't tourists, and despite what their uniforms suggested, they certainly weren't police officers. In the span of 81 minutes, these two men would pull off the largest property theft in the history of the world. We aren't just talking about a simple burglary here. We are talking about the loss of 13 irreplaceable masterpieces, works by Rembrandt, Vermeer, Degas, and Manet. The combined value today sits conservatively at $500 million, though many experts argue the cultural value is simply incalculable. It is a crime that remains unsolved to this day. It's the holy grail of art crime mysteries. The FBI has chased leads from Boston to Japan, from the Irish Republican Army to the Connecticut mob, yet not a single piece of the stolen art has ever surfaced. Today, we are walking you through every agonizing minute of that night, the history of the eccentric woman who built the collection, and the dark underworld of suspects that the FBI has been tracking for over 3 decades. I'm Speaker 1, and I'm Speaker 2. Welcome to the story of the empty frames. Before we get into the night of the robbery, we have to understand the building itself. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum isn't a normal gallery. It's a Venetian palace dropped into the middle of Boston. It was built by Isabella Stewart Gardner, a wealthy, eccentric art collector who died in 1924. She called it Fenway Court. Isabella was a force of nature. In the late 19th century, Boston society was very rigid, very Puritan. And here comes Isabella, drinking beer, loving the Red Sox, and collecting controversial art. She built this museum to house her personal collection, arranging every painting, every chair, and every tapestry exactly how she wanted it. And this is crucial for our story, her will. Isabella's will stipulated that the collection must remain permanently exactly as she left it. Nothing could be added, nothing removed, and nothing rearranged. If the trustees violated these terms, the entire museum and its contents were to be sold, and the money donated to Harvard University. That stipulation created a frozen moment in time, so when you walk in there, you are seeing the year 1924. Exactly. That aesthetic rigidity is what makes the crime so visceral today. But let's fast forward to 1990. The museum was known for its beauty, but not exactly for its high-tech security. It was running on a tight budget. The security staff were mostly young, college-aged kids or musicians looking for a quiet night shift. On the night of March 17th, leading into the 18th, there were 2 guards on duty. The first was Rick Abath, a 23-year-old rock musician with a perm and a rebellious streak. He was the one manning the security desk. The second guard was 25-year-old Randy Hestand. They were working the graveyard shift. Standard protocol required one guard to roam the galleries with a flashlight and a walkie-talkie, while the other stayed at the desk monitoring the alarms. It's worth noting that the security culture at the Gardner in 1990 was relaxed. There were motion detectors, but no video cameras recording in the galleries. The only camera was a closed-circuit feed at the side employee entrance, and it didn't record on tape. It just showed a live feed to the guard at the desk. The alarms were internal, mostly designed to alert the desk guard if someone got too close to a painting.
And Rick Abath had actually given his 2 weeks' notice. He was moving on. This was one of his last shifts. Earlier in the evening, there had been a bit of a party atmosphere nearby due to St. Patrick's Day, but inside the museum, it was dead quiet. Abath did his rounds first. Interestingly, during his patrol, he opened the side door on Palace Road briefly before shutting it again. He later claimed he did it to check for a noise, but that action broke the magnetic seal on the door. That detail has haunted investigators. Was it a signal, or just a bored guard checking a door? Regardless, by 1 a.m., Abath was back at the desk. Hestand was out on patrol in the Dutch room on the 2nd floor. The museum was dark, filled with shadows cast by the courtyard garden. Then the buzzer rang. It was 1:24 a.m. Rick Abath looked at the CCTV monitor. He saw a hatchback parked on Palace Road and 2 men standing at the staff entrance. They were wearing police uniforms, peak caps, badges, the works. One of them spoke into the intercom. He said, "Police, let us in. We heard about a disturbance in the courtyard." Now this is the critical moment. Museum policy was strict. Never open the door for anyone at night, not even the police. If the police are there, you call the station to verify. But Abath didn't do that. He was a young kid. It was late, and authority figures were demanding entry. He buzzed them in. The 2 men entered the security vestibule. They were described as white males. One was about 5'9" to 5'10", the other slightly taller, heavier. They looked the part. The taller officer looked at Abath and said, "You look familiar. Do we have a warrant out for you?" It was a brilliant psychological ploy. It put Abath on the defensive immediately. He stepped out from behind the security desk, away from the only panic button that could alert the outside world. He said, "No, I don't think so." The officer told him to show his ID and step against the wall. Abath complied. He was confused, maybe a little scared. The second guard, Randy Heston, walked into the vestibule at that moment. The intruders ordered him against the wall too. Then the handcuffs came out. As the thieves were cuffing the guards, Abath noticed something strange. One of the officers had a fake mustache. It was practically falling off his lip. That was the moment he realized, these aren't cops. One of the thieves looked at them and said, "Gentlemen, this is a robbery. Don't give us any problems and you won't get hurt." They took the guards down to the basement. They duct taped their hands, feet, and eyes. They chained them to a steam pipe and a workbench. The guards were neutralized. The thieves now had the entire museum to themselves. No police were coming. No alarms were dialed out. They had total control. They headed upstairs. Their movements were tracked by the internal motion detectors, which printed out a log of their activity. This printout is the only witness we have to their path. At 1:48 a.m., they entered the Dutch room on the 2nd floor. This room is the heart of the collection. It contained works by Rembrandt and Vermeer. They went straight for the big one, Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee. It is Rembrandt's only seascape, a massive dramatic painting of Christ calming the waves while the disciples panic. But here is the tragedy. The painting was painted on a heavy oak panel stretcher. It was heavy and cumbersome. Instead of carefully removing it, the thieves took knives and brutally cut the canvas out of its frame. The sound of that canvas ripping must have been excruciating. They left the heavy gilded frame hanging empty on the wall and the stretcher bars on the floor. They did the same thing to A Lady and Gentleman in Black, another Rembrandt. Then they turned to Vermeer, the concert. It was one of only 34 or 36 known Vermeers in the world, a priceless, intimate scene of music. They smashed the glass and cut that one out too.
They also took a small self-portrait etching by Rembrandt and a landscape by Govert Flinck. Then, strangely, they bypassed works of immense value, like the Raphaels or the Botticellis, and grabbed an ancient Chinese bronze beaker, a gu from the Shang dynasty. It's one of the oldest things in the museum, dating back to 1200 BC. It didn't fit the pattern of Dutch masters. It felt opportunistic. While one thief was butchering masterpieces in the Dutch room, the other was in the short gallery. He focused on 5 drawings by Degas and a finial, a bronze eagle from the top of a Napoleonic flagstaff. The eagle finial is baffling. He apparently tried to unscrew the whole flagstaff, failed, and just took the eagle. It suggests they weren't expert art connoisseurs. They were grab-and-go thugs with a shopping list. They moved to the Blue Room on the 1st floor and took Chez Tortoni by Edouard Manet. Again, the motion detectors tell a strange story here. The data shows footsteps in the Blue Room at 2:41 a.m., but the guards say the thieves left at 2:45 a.m. That means they were still grabbing items right up into the last second. They made 2 trips to their car to load the loot. Before leaving, they went back down to the basement. They checked on the guards. They told them, "You'll be hearing from us in about a year," a promise of a ransom demand that never came. Then they smashed the office hard drive that stored the alarm data, though they missed the printer that had already printed the hard copy logs, and they took the video cassette from the CCTV recorder. At 2:45 a.m., the side door opened and closed for the last time. They vanished into the fog. They had 13 objects: the storm on the Sea of Galilee, A Lady and Gentleman in Black, the concert, Chez Tortoni, the Govert Flinck landscape, the Chinese beaker, 5 Degas drawings, the eagle finial, and the Rembrandt etching. The heist was over. The guards were found around 8:15 a.m. when the morning security shift arrived. They couldn't get in, realized something was wrong, and called the real police. When the authorities entered the Dutch room, they saw the carnage: shards of glass on the floor, empty frames staring back at them. It was a crime scene, but it felt like a graveyard. The investigation began immediately, but it was chaotic. The Boston police and the FBI were stepping on each other's toes initially. They dusted for fingerprints, but the thieves had worn gloves. They didn't leave behind hair or DNA that was usable with 1990 technology. The composite sketches were generic, two guys with fake mustaches. The theory started flying. Was it the IRA? The Irish Republican Army was known to use art as currency or leverage for bargaining prisons, but the IRA usually stole art in Europe, and they usually communicated quickly. No call came. Was it an inside job? Rick Aboth was scrutinized heavily. His motion to open the door earlier in the night, the fact that the motion detectors didn't pick up movement in the Blue Room during the time the Manet was taken, suggesting it might have been taken earlier. But Aboth passed polygraphs, and no hard evidence ever linked him to the conspiracy. The focus eventually shifted to the Boston Mafia, specifically the Merlino crew. This is where the story gets gritty. The FBI believes the heist was organized by local gangsters who didn't really care about art, but viewed the paintings as get-out-of-jail-free cards. If one of them got pinched for a drug charge or a murder, they could trade a Vermeer for a reduced sentence. That was the logic. Two names came up repeatedly, George Riesfelder and Lenny DiMuzio. They resembled the sketches. Riesfelder frequented a place where the stolen car might have been sourced. Tragically, both men died within a year or two of the heist. Drug overdoses and gang violence. Dead men tell no tales. But the trail didn't end there. It led to a man named David Turner, and eventually to a Connecticut mobster named Robert Gentile.
Robert Gentile is the most frustrating piece of this puzzle. He was a made man in the Philadelphia crime family, but operated out of Connecticut. In the late 2000s, the widow of another gangster claimed her husband gave Gentile two of the paintings. The FBI raided Gentile's house. They found a false floor in his shed. Underneath was a plastic tub. But the tub was empty. It contained a list of the stolen paintings with their potential black market prices, but no art. Gentile denied everything until his dying day. He died in 2021, taking whatever he knew to the grave. The FBI has offered a reward that rose to $5 million, then $10 million. It is the largest bounty ever offered for private property. And still, silence. There have been sightings. A reporter was taken blindfolded to a warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn, where he claimed to see the Sea of Galilee by flashlight, but nothing came of it. The art has likely been moved through the underworld, perhaps stored in bad conditions, decaying in a damp basement in Philly, or hidden behind a wall in Ireland. We just don't know. Back at the museum, the decision was made to honor Isabella's will in the most heartbreaking way possible. Because the will states nothing can be changed, they could not replace the stolen works with other art. Instead, they rehung the empty frames. If you visit the Gardner Museum today, you walk into the Dutch room and you see them. 4 large gilded rectangles framing nothing but the damask wallpaper behind them. They are ghostly. They are a memorial to what was lost and a placeholder for what we hope will one day return. It is a vigil that has lasted over 30 years. The frames are waiting, and until those canvases are returned, the mystery of the Gardner heist remains the biggest gaping hole in the history of art. It is 1:24 in the morning on March 18th, 1990. The city of Boston is sleeping off a heavy St. Patrick's Day hangover. The streets are mostly quiet, damp with the chill of late winter. Inside the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, security guard Rick Aboth is sitting at the main desk. He is 23 years old, a musician, a guy who just wants to get through his shift. Everything is quiet until the buzzer screams. And that sound changes everything. It is the sound of history breaking. Who was on the monitors? Aboth looks at the grainy black and white screen. He sees 2 men in police uniforms. They look legitimate. They have the badges, the hats, the demeanor. One of them speaks into the intercom. He says, "Police, we heard a disturbance in the courtyard. Let us in." Now, speaker 2, put yourself in that chair. It is the middle of the night. You are a young guard, and the authorities are at the door telling you something is wrong. Protocol says you do not open that door. The museum rules were explicit. Nobody gets in after hours, not even the Pope. But fear is a powerful motivator, right? If a cop tells you to open up, you open up. Exactly. And that is the fatal error. Aboth buzzes them in. The 2 men enter the employee entrance. They immediately take control of the room. They ask Aboth if anyone else is working. He tells them his partner is on rounds. They wait. When the second guard arrives, the officers make their move. One of them looks at Aboth and says, "You look familiar. I think we have a warrant for your arrest." It is a brilliant psychological trick. It puts the guards on the defensive. Abath steps away from the desk, away from the panic button. He asks what he did. The officer tells him to step out from behind the desk and provide identification. And the moment he steps away from that desk, the only link to the outside world is severed. That alarm button was his lifeline.
Precisely. The moment he is in the open, they spin him around and handcuff him. The second guard is handcuffed moments later. It is only then, as the metal clicks shut, that Abath realizes these aren't real handcuffs. They are too small, too flimsy, and the cop doesn't recite Miranda rights. He looks at them and says, "Gentlemen, this is a robbery. Don't give us any trouble and you won't get hurt." They take the guards down to the basement, duct tape their eyes and mouths, and chain them to a workbench and a steam pipe. The thieves are now alone in the museum. They have 81 minutes. 81 minutes is an eternity in the world of heist crimes. Usually it is smash and grab, 3 minutes, maybe 5. 81 minutes implies they knew nobody was coming. They were comfortable. They were incredibly comfortable. But they weren't exactly professional art connoisseurs. This is where the profile of the thieves gets interesting. They head upstairs to the Dutch room. This is the heart of the collection. It houses some of the most valuable paintings on earth. They go straight for Rembrandt. But the way they handle the art is brutal. They do not carefully dismantle the frames. They smash the protective glass. They take knives and cut the canvases right out of the stretchers. That hurts to hear. These are masterpieces, and they are slicing them up like they are cutting carpet. What did they take from that room? They took Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee. It is the only seascape Rembrandt ever painted. It depicts Jesus and the disciples on a boat in a violent storm. It is dynamic, terrifying, and absolutely priceless. They also took A Lady and Gentleman in Black, another Rembrandt, and then they turned to the Vermeer, the concert. This is arguably the most valuable stolen object in the world. Johannes Vermeer only painted about 36 works in his entire life. To lose one is a tragedy for humanity. The concert alone is valued at over $250 million today. And yet, amidst this treasure trove, they ignored other things, right? They left behind other Rembrandts. They walked past Botticellis. It seems chaotic. It was bizarrely selective and yet sloppy. They went into the short gallery and took 5 drawings by Edgar Degas and a bronze eagle finial from the top of a Napoleonic flag. The eagle finial is the strangest item. It's worth maybe a few $1,000s on a good day. Why take the effort to unscrew a bronze eagle when there are Raphael paintings nearby? It suggests they had a shopping list, but maybe not a very good one, or they were grabbing whatever caught their eye in the moment. At one point, the motion detectors show them entering the Blue Room. There, they took Manet's Chess Tortoni. The Blue Room entry is controversial, isn't it? Because the motion detectors tell a conflicting story regarding the guards. That is the first major loose end. The motion detectors recorded the thieves' movements perfectly in the Dutch room and the short gallery, but the records show no motion in the Blue Room during the time the thieves were supposed to be there. However, the records do show footsteps in the Blue Room earlier that night, during Rick Abbott's rounds. The only person the censors tracked in the Blue Room that night was Rick Abbott. So did Abbott take the Manet earlier? Or did the thieves hover in the doorway and somehow reach it? It's a detail that has obsessed investigators for decades. So at 2:45 a.m., they leave. They load the car, they vanish into the Boston night. The next morning, the day shift arrives. And the scene they find is haunting. The guards are still tied up in the basement, shaken but alive. Upstairs, the museum is a crime scene. Broken glass covers the floor, and on the walls, empty frames hang like open wounds. Isabella Stewart Gardner's will stipulated that nothing in the collection could ever be moved or changed, so the museum directors made a choice. They left the frames. To this day, if you walk into the Dutch room, you see the ornate gilded frames where the Rembrandts and the Vermeer used to be. They are framing nothing but empty wall space. Let's talk about the investigation. This is $500 million in art. The FBI must have turned Boston upside down.
They did. But the investigation was plagued by false leads, dead ends, and the distinct silence of the Boston underworld. You have to understand Boston in 1990. The city was a battleground for organized crime. You had the Winter Hill Gang, led by Whitey Bulger. You had the Italian mob in the North End. You had warring factions. The FBI's working theory was that this wasn't an art heist for the sake of art. You can't sell The Storm on the Sea of Galilee. You can't hang it in your living room. It's too famous. It's radioactive. So it was collateral, currency, a get-out-of-jail-free card. Exactly. In the criminal underworld, high-profile art is used as a bargaining chip. If a boss gets pinched, he offers to return a Rembrandt in exchange for a reduced sentence or better prison conditions. That was the leading theory. The FBI focused heavily on a crew associated with the Violet Gang and the Merlino clan. One name that comes up constantly is David Turner. Turner was a local career criminal, right? And he looked a lot like the police sketch. The resemblance is striking. And David Turner had a boss, Carmelo Merlino, who ran a garage called TRC Auto Electric in Dorchester. The FBI had an informant who claimed Merlino was talking about a big score, specifically mentioning the Gardner Museum, years before it happened. They had surveillance on these guys, but they never found the physical evidence linking them to the night of the robbery. Turner was eventually arrested for a different planned robbery of an armored car, a setup by the FBI actually, and he did serious time. He never flipped on the Gardner case. What about the other suspect, the one with the rock-solid connection to the art world's dark side? You're thinking of Miles Connor. Miles is a legend in art theft circles. He once stole a Rembrandt from another Boston museum just to negotiate a lighter sentence for a previous crime, and it worked. He actually returned the art and got his sentence reduced. At the time of the Gardner heist, Miles was in jail, so he couldn't have done it himself, but he claims he scouted the place. He claims he had the plan, and he claims he knows who did it. He points the finger at a man named Bobby Donati. He was a mob guy, heavily involved in the faction wars. Right. The theory is that Donati robbed the museum to get his friend Vincent Ferrara out of jail. Ferrara was facing a heavy sentence for racketeering. Donati thought if he stole the art, he could trade it for Ferrara's freedom. But before he could make the deal, the gang war caught up with him. Donati was found murdered in the trunk of his Cadillac a year after the heist, brutally killed. If he had the art, the location died with him. This is the problem with this case. Everyone who might know something ends up dead. It's a trail of corpses. It is. But there was one lead that stayed hot well into the 2010s. It leads us to Connecticut and a man named Robert the Cook Gentile. Gentile was a mobster, a made man in the Philadelphia crime family, but operating out of Hartford. In the late 90s, the widow of another criminal, Robert Gorante, told the FBI that her husband had given 2 of the stolen paintings to Gentile for safekeeping. She said they met in a parking lot in Portland, Maine, and handed over the tubes containing the canvas. That is a huge accusation. Did the FBI go after Gentile? They went after him hard, for years. They brought him in on weapons charges, drug charges, anything to squeeze him. In 2012, they raided his house in Manchester, Connecticut. They tore up the floorboards. They used ground-penetrating radar in his backyard. They found a false floor in his shed. Beneath it was a plastic tub. And inside the tub, nothing. It was empty. But they found a handwritten list of the stolen Gardner art with the black market prices listed next to them. Why would a low-level mobster in Connecticut have a price sheet for the specific 13 items stolen from the Gardner unless he was trying to sell them? Gentile claimed he was framed, that the list was planted, or that he was just running a scam on someone else. He stuck to that story until his dying breath. He died in 2021, taking whatever secrets he had to the grave. His lawyer always maintained that if Gentile wanted the reward money, which was up to $10 million at one point, he would have given the art back. He was broke. Why stay poor if you are sitting on $500 million? That's the logic that stumps me. Greed usually wins. If he had it, he would have sold it or claimed the reward. Unless he didn't have the art anymore, or unless the art was destroyed. That is the nightmare scenario. We know the thieves were rough. We know they cut the canvases. Art is fragile. If those canvases were rolled up tightly and shoved into a damp basement or a humid attic for 30 years, the paint would be flaking off. The storm on the Sea of Galilee might look like a pile of dust by now. There is a chilling possibility that the world's greatest art heist resulted in the world's greatest art destruction. Let's go back to Rick Abath, the guard. We touched on him earlier. He was the one who opened the door. He was the one with the motion detector anomaly in the Blue Room. Did the FBI ever consider him a co-conspirator? They looked at him very closely. For a long time, he was a primary suspect. The theory was that it was an inside job. How did the thieves know when to come? How did they know the layout so well? Why did Abath open the door so quickly? But despite the suspicion, they never found a smoking gun. Abath never showed any signs of sudden wealth. He lived a quiet life. He passed lie detector tests, though those are not always reliable. He has always maintained his innocence, portraying himself as a victim of a terrifying crime. The inside job theory is compelling because of the simplicity, but the evidence just isn't there to close the case. So we have the Boston mob, the Connecticut connection, the inside job theory, and a dead end for every single one. What is the status of the investigation today? The case is still active. The FBI has a dedicated team for art crime, and the Gardner case is their white whale. In 2013, the FBI announced with great confidence that they knew who did it. They stated they had identified the thieves as members of a mid-Atlantic criminal organization. They believed the art was moved to Connecticut and then Philadelphia. But they stopped short of naming names because the thieves were likely dead. They were hoping that announcement would flush out the location of the art. It didn't. The tips still trickle in, but nothing has led to a recovery. It's been over 30 years. The statute of limitations on the robbery itself has run out. That means if someone walked into the FBI headquarters today with the concert under their arm, they wouldn't be charged for the theft, right? Theoretically, yes. The statute for the theft is 5 years. However, you could still be charged with possession of stolen property or concealing evidence. But the authorities have made it very clear. They don't care about the arrests anymore. They want the art. The immunity deals have been on the table for decades. The museum has offered a $10 million reward for information leading to the recovery, no questions asked. They just want the paintings back. The cultural impact of this is staggering. It's not just about money.
No, it's about heritage. To lose a Vermeer is to lose a piece of human genius. There are only 30-some left. When you walk through the museum today, the experience is defined by absence. You see the richness of the tapestry, the furniture, the other paintings, and then you hit those empty frames. It's a visceral reminder of violation. The museum director once said the empty frames are placeholders for hope. They are waiting, but with every passing year, that hope gets a little more fragile. Do you think we will ever see them again? I oscillate between optimism and cynicism. Art has a way of resurfacing. Paintings stolen by Nazis in World War II are still being found in attics and basements today, 70 or 80 years later. Sometimes a grandchild cleans out a deceased relative's house and finds something they don't recognize. Maybe the Gardner art is rolled up in a tube in a garage in South Philly, disguised as old wallpaper. Maybe it's hanging in a private bunker of a drug lord in Europe, though that's more of a Hollywood trope than reality. The sadder reality is usually neglect. But as long as those frames are empty, the story isn't over. It is the ultimate mystery. A locked room, 2 fake cops, 81 minutes, and a vanishing act that has baffled the world's best investigators. And that is why we are still talking about it. It's the audacity of it. The idea that you can walk into a palace of culture and just take it. It reminds us that history is fragile. We think of museums as fortresses, as permanent vaults for our civilization's treasures. But on March 18, 1990, we learned that all it takes is a buzzer, a uniform, and a roll of duct tape to strip that away. Until the art returns, the ghosts of the Gardner Museum will continue to haunt Boston. What a story. It leaves you checking your own locks a little tighter tonight. Indeed. Keep your eyes open, and if you see a sea storm painted by Rembrandt at a garage sale, give the FBI a call. Thank you for listening to this deep dive into the world's biggest art heist. We will be back next week with another unsolved mystery. Wait, before we go, I have one last question that always bugs me. The eagle. Why the eagle? That is the detail that drives profilers crazy. The eagle finial. It was high up. It was difficult to reach. It wasn't worth much compared to everything else. Some say it was a trophy, a souvenir for the boss. Others say it signifies a specific group, maybe a gang signature. But there is a simpler theory. They tried to take the flag, the Napoleonic flag attached to it, but they couldn't get the flag off or it was too bulky, so they unscrewed the top and took the eagle out of frustration. It speaks to the amateur nature of the physical act, clashing with the sophistication of the target selection. It's a paradox, just like the whole case. Professional yet sloppy, violent yet bloodless, seen by everyone yet hidden from the world. A paradox indeed. It really does make you wonder if we are looking at this all wrong. Maybe it wasn't the mob. Maybe it wasn't the IRA. Maybe it was just 2 guys who got lucky. Luck is a huge factor in crime. They buzz the door. If Abath says no, the heist doesn't happen. If the police drive by during the 81 minutes, they get caught. If the duct tape doesn't hold, the guards trigger the alarm.
A million things had to go right for them and wrong for the museum. It was the perfect storm. A storm on the Sea of Galilee, you might say. I see what you did there. But seriously, the sheer duration, 81 minutes. I can't get over that. Most bank robberies are under 3 minutes. To spend over an hour in a building you have broken into requires nerves of steel or total ignorance of the risk.
Or total assurance. Assurance that the police weren't coming. That leads us back to the inside help theory. Or it speaks to the arrogance of the Boston criminal element at that time. They felt they owned the city. They felt untouchable. And in a way, for the last 3 decades, they have been proved right. They beat the system. They took the prize, and they got away with it. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum remains a crime scene. Every visitor is a witness to the aftermath. And until those paintings come home, the case remains open, the frames remain empty, and the mystery endures. That is the legacy of March 18th, 1990.